Alright, so in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create the render that I'm about to show you right now, and we're going to do something very similar to it. It's running kind of slow because I'm screen capturing here. And you can see it was using cycles because of the quality of the video. The water itself was used as a glass texture, which made it look clear. But anyway, not to get too ahead of myself, I'm going to just minimize this and show you what it looks like in Blender. In Blender, you're going to have basically a sort of domain and an inflow, which are two different objects that react with each other to create the fluid simulation. The water itself is the inflow, and I have an invisible box, you can't see it, that actually was used to create the surface that the water flows into. It was set to 100 frames, so basically if you look on over here, you can see how it sort of animates as we go along. I apologize for the slow resolution of it, but it does pour in there pretty nicely in real time. And that's the shape that was used actually for the domain. I actually started out with a bowl concept first, which made the which I intended on having not square in the beginning. I intended to have a bowl, but for some reason it's kept the shape of a square, so I just decided to build a square around as the domain. So I'll go ahead and just show you how everything was set up, and we'll start from scratch here. So I'll go to File, New, and as you can see, go ahead and hit X and delete the original object. Alright, so I like to immediately switch to perspective, ortho, and I'll go ahead and just delete that light. When you use cycles, you don't want to use any of the original lights. You're going to use planes, and those planes are actually turned into lights by selecting the emission button from the materials. So go ahead, and I'm going to kind of set up a very similar version to that scene, but not exactly the same thing, just for the sake of speed. I'll go ahead and set the scene first, so just add a plane, and then scale it to about the size of the grid. Zoom in a little bit, and then go ahead and add another cube. And the first cube we're going to make, that's going to be our domain. Now the domain means that that's going to be what is sort of like the bucket, if so to speak, that the water is going to be contained in, or the fluid. Even though it's hard to kind of understand at first, but this is actually the water itself. It's just sort of, it becomes the water by becoming this space, the space that the water's in. You'll kind of understand more as you make fluid simulations, but just trust me, it's when you actually render the water, this is the cube that the water will be when you click on the water. So when you click on that blue water that I showed you earlier, it would actually come up over here as this cube, even though it's the container that the cube is coming out of. So go ahead and just scale, make it a little longer there. Let's say about there, and scale along the y-axis. I'm going to make it kind of flatter there. And then move up, and then scale Z. Sorry. Right about there is fine. Go ahead and switch to cycles as well for now. And alright, our next step is going to be to go ahead and make our inflow, which is the object that the water will begin and come out of. It's not going to be the water, it's going to be where the water actually comes out of. So go ahead and switch to wireframe. And for this, I used a cylinder. If I can see that here, I got my motion capture in the way. Go ahead and move it right in the middle of the x-axis there. Just center it. Doesn't have to be perfect, really, for this tutorial. And scoot it over a little bit because we're gonna have it falling out into it. We don't want it to hit the wall first, so move it up. Hit R and Y to rotate on the y-axis. I angled mine down a little bit, but we'll scale it first, so I'll just hit 90. And then scale X, hit SX, and then just scale the whole thing. We don't want the diameter of the water to be quite that big. And move it back. And as you can see now, it's kind of like at the wall there. And rotate Y a little bit. Alright, that's pretty much it for that. Click the big box, and then you're going to go ahead and set up the physics for this. Just in case any of you were wondering, I'm using the QuickTime screen capture, so it is running kind of slow on my Mac right now. With that at the same time, you can go ahead and hit fluid. This is the physics button. Hit fluid. And then for our large box, remember it's going to be domain. And then right click on our other dude there, and go ahead and click fluid again, and then that's going to be inflow. And then you're going to make sure that this is going to be enabled, and we want it to come out of the x-axis this way. So go ahead and click the cylinder there and watch the x-axis as we move it. As you can see, the number's going down, so that means it's getting less negative, it's going in a positive direction, so we want that fluid to come out probably around, I would set it to 1 would be okay for that. And then we'll go ahead and do volume is fine. Alright, for the domain, it's not going to be showing up right now, so go ahead and hit cube. And then go ahead and hit, let's see here. We'll have it do a 4-second animation, that's what I did for mine. And then for fluid particles, we'll do tracer at about 2, and then generate at about 0.3. I believe that's what I did for the animation. And then I've never used this. You can probably try that out. I'm guessing it just plays with the viscosity, to be honest. So it's, for now, I'm just going to keep it at water because we're going to use water. And then for smoothing subdivisions, I think I put subdivisions to 1, if I'm correct. Alright, and then go ahead and hit bake. For the resolution, this is what it's going to look like in our example screen, and this is the resolution it's going to actually do when you render it. I'm going to turn that down just for the tutorial, so when it's rendered in the tutorial, it doesn't end up being huge. So we'll put it at, we'll put it at like 30, make it really low. And then for preview, just go ahead and also turn that down even lower because it's just a preview, it doesn't really matter. See, render will be the final, and then viewport will be preview. You can also make this, for some reason, the preview if you wanted to, but don't worry about that for now. And lastly, just hit bake. And you're going to see it's baking it up here, which means that it's sort of finalizing all of your presets into one 3D mesh at a time. So we can go back into solid mode here. And this is our water. Again, you'll see that the cylinder itself is not selected. Notice how I have that original box selected, and when it became invisible, you can actually see how, even though that box was a giant box, it's still selecting the water if I select the box, because the box itself is the water. Now, this is on frame 1, and because I set it to 4 seconds, it's going to be about 100 frames long because we have a 25 frames per second. So at frame 1, it's going to look like this, and if you go to your track timeline there, and you drag it across, you'll see that it actually is going to start kind of pouring out of there. And that looks actually pretty nice. I'm pretty happy with that for this. Alright, so it went a little longer than I thought. I think I actually might have just set it to end at the default amount. Anyway, you can always choose how long you want it to render for anyway. Now here's where the rest of that render that I did comes in. Now that you have the fluid and the base, all you have to do is just simply model the objects around it that you want to be in the scene. The fluid's done. Nothing else has to be done for this. I'll show you in cycles what we're going to do to make it look like water, but that's pretty much it. To make the actual box, now I'm going to set the render to end at 80, so I'm going to go see what it looks like at about, actually I'll set it to 60 for the sake of this tutorial. You know, I'll set it at 40. No, I'll set it at 60, and then I'll just edit this later. So go ahead and deselect, and you can see this is what the scene will look like at the end of our animation. Obviously it's just water for now, so it's kind of no use to us. But we're going to set up that little container that I made real quick. It's not going to take too long. Now I just added a plane, and I made it the same size as the fluid container there. So I'll go ahead and switch to wireframe just to make this really faster. Scale it up to fit around just a little bit bigger, not very much bigger at all. Position it, and I'm going to scale it a little bit more by X and Y because I think scale it more by X and Y at a time, so I can just get that kind of X perfect, and then go down Y before I scale Y. Actually, that's good right there. Alright, so now I'm going to move it. I'm going to go view to any side view, back, right, front, left, doesn't matter. And then just go ahead and zoom in so we can see how close we are getting to the bottom of the fluid, because this is going to be the base of where it first hits. It's going to be the inside of the bowl or container. Let's just call it sink, I guess. Alright, that's positioned good enough. Could be actually looking a little wider here by X, so scale X. Hit Shift, and that'll kind of make it a little slower. That's probably good. Obviously, we couldn't see exactly how that was working out, but whatever. What I had a problem is when I hit Extrude, obviously it's one face, so it's actually going to start making a giant square instead of just the edges coming out, because remember, we just want the edges to come out. We don't want a top, because then we're going to have to pull it over to the side. So to do that, I actually just went into edit mode, and then hit W, and then subdivide once, and now we can just select the edges around the actual square here. And then we can just hit extrude and hit Z so it's perfectly on the Z axis. And that's probably good right there. So now we have like a little container. Switch back to the solid mode. and then go ahead and hit extrude, and then hit scale. Alright, and then just go ahead and extrude one more time, hit Z, and just pull it down until you hit the floor, or I think I might have actually put it a little above the floor, and just extruded and scaled again inwards. So it kind of just, yeah, that worked. Okay. Alright, so really, obviously making the faucet head's pretty simple. I'm really not going to go into detail about that. All it is just, you just set up a cube and then add a little cylinder coming out of it. It's really, really easy. You can do any kind of textures you want. It's really not something I'm going to go over in too much detail. Go ahead and switch in cycles. Go ahead and switch to rendered in cycles. And you can see we have no light right now. It's just pretty plain. And so we'll have to go ahead and add a light. So go ahead and go back into object mode and hit add mesh plane, and this is going to be our first light. I just did one side light for this tutorial for that render that I did. It looked fine, so I'm just going to do that here too. Oops, render. Rotate. Hit RX and 90, and that'll get you a nice flat plane. Put it down a little bit. I scaled it up a little bit. Alright, so for cycles, if any of you are new to cycles, the materials are completely different than in Blender Render. So when I hit new material, you're not going to see what we normally see. For now, I'll do a tutorial about how to use cycles, but just follow along and you'll get it. I'll put some little details in there, but again, I'll go over all that in another tutorial. For surface, you're going to hit emission. And that just becomes, what that means is that it's, in the preview, you're not going to see any detail. It's just white. All it is light. And you can change the color of that light by actually hitting the color and changing it there. Don't worry about displacement or anything. And basically what that does, because cycles is a real-world sort of environment lighting, things emit light and bounce off each other. So there's no, using a light in Blender is not, from Blender is not going to really make any use to you. It's not going to look real, it's going to look crappy. This is the way that cycles was intended to have a light. So we're going to go ahead and go to view. When you hit cycles, again, when you hit rendered, you're looking at it in the way that cycles render engine is going to render things. So this light's not nearly strong enough for what we're doing. So go ahead and hit strength and slowly drag up to about there, I'd say. And then I change the color of the floor, and when I do that, things just light up really nice. So I click the floor, and even though it looks like this and you can't see an outline, if you right click anything, it's still gonna come up here in the panels, and just change the color of the floor and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's gonna make it immediately look a lot better. I did a yellow floor, and as you can see, we've already kind of made that a lot nicer. Go into the world panel as well, and for surface color, this is what the shadow colors look like. I changed that a little darker because that will really make the contrast in your image better. Alright, now for the fun part, click the water. Right click the water, excuse me. And for the water, go to materials, hit new, and just like we went to surface and we went to diffuse and hit emission for the plane, go ahead and hit glass. And as you can see, it looks like water, because water is pretty much glass. As far as refractory purposes go, maybe a little different, but in all essences, it's gonna look pretty good. Excuse me. You can change roughness, all this stuff. I really want to change it. I tried to mess around with this. It didn't really make any difference at all, too much. So you can do that. It looks like it's just changing its clearness, sort of. Oh, that looks bad. Yeah, go ahead and just go back to 1.5, I think it was. this. Color does nothing really at all. I changed color and it didn't do anything, so I'm not going to change it here. Alright, so you can see that we have our scene set up. If I switch to solid mode and I go back and forth, you can see it's coming back out, and we can have it go back in. So make sure you set your end down here to the end of your animation that you want it to end at. Also, I'll hit 60. And I mean, even though it still shows up over here, it won't render past 60 unless you tell it to. And for the camera, it's pretty simple. I'm assuming you know how to move the camera. If you don't, I'll go over it really quickly for you. Go ahead and right click the camera and pull up another view here so we can see what the camera view is going to look like. View, camera, and then hit G when you're moving around. And you can just, you don't have to click any buttons. You just scroll the mouse up and down and you can set up a nice little view there. So that's going to work for us. Alright, so this will be our starting view. So go to, oh crap. Alright, so hit G and then click when you're done. That's what I didn't do. Alright. Crap. Right click when you're done. Alright, so go back to frame 1. Alright, so to add the first keyframe in for the camera, all you're going to do is just go ahead and click this button, which is automatically going to insert keyframes in between the keyframes that you select. This is the insert keyframe menu. Go ahead and click location, rotation, scale. It's pretty much straightforward. And then hit the last frame here. And then just, you can move the camera like this actually if you want. That's what I did. And then rotate, Z. Stop being a bitch. I'll just do it here. So now, as we move, watch over here, as we move this bar, the camera moves along with it. So if we hit play, we'll see what our final render will look like once it's rendered. As you can see, this is exactly what I set up. It's really no use watching this in cycles. It's going to look like complete crap. It's extremely blurry, but it gives you an idea of the lighting. So if we go to view camera, you'll see what I mean. And this is all it is, people. This is really the basics of fluid simulation. It's that easy. Again, the detail over here is pretty crappy because I set it that way, but the more when you have your domain, excuse me, when you set up your inflow, you can change the detail. Excuse me, it is the domain. In the domain, when you play around with these resolutions, that's going to change how many triangles are actually in your water. The more triangles, the more realistic, obviously, but also the more time to render. So I'm going to go ahead and render this, and we'll come back when it's done. I'm going to make a really low quality rendering, and you can kind of see the quality already over here in the final render. So I will be back in less than a second, I guess, for you guys. And as you can see, it's pretty much exactly the same concept that the video that I originally posted. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment. I can tell you how to alter some of the details. But again, the only thing that I didn't do in this tutorial that was in the original video was that there was a little sink thing right there, faucet, I guess. Anyway, just going to go over really quick about how to convert and save animations, because as I just saved this little mini render, I made a mistake and had to re-render it, and I just want you to have to do that. Blender automatically will have you render the file to a temporary folder in Blender. You don't want that, because then you can't, it's not saving it into a place in your computer that you can even access. At least for MacBook users or Mac users, not sure about Windows, but anyway, so to change that in the render settings here, or I guess the just general settings, you'll go ahead and click the camera, and then down here it says output. So go ahead and click output, and then click the file, and then it's obviously going to give you a directory. You find it, you hit accept, cancel, and then also what you can do is you can adjust the dimensions of the screen. You can go ahead and hit this. Comes up with some presets here. It'll change the size of the camera, 16 by 9, 4 by 3. You'll see it change. And then the aspect ratio. I think I kind of messed with this earlier, and it kind of rendered kind of squished on the sides, unlike my first one. But again, it's really something that you won't have a problem with unless you do something I did, which I didn't do on the camera. So anyway, if you want to have it saved as a QuickTime file, I had problems when I hit MPEG and then selected MPEG, so I hit QuickTime. You can do AVI as well. I just prefer QuickTime because I'm using a Mac. And then lastly, you just for the codec, this is going to be what's going to compress the final render width into an animation. If you hit an image file, it's just going to save it as a series of images. You probably don't want that. So I just always use just MP4, which is kind of general nowadays, especially for mobile phones, that kind of thing. You don't have to worry about audio. And lastly, the quality just controls the quality of the compression. So again, I can definitely answer any questions or comments if you have any. Appreciate you watching, and look forward to some more tutorials about how to use Blender. I'm going to start doing some simple modeling tutorials, maybe some animation tutorials. Go ahead and subscribe if you are interested. Thank you, and have a nice day, everybody.